started officially here. It's 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and if you've just joined us, again, my name is Marc, and I am joined by my colleague Larry Walters, and we're here to host the National FairTax webinar in our 4th year, I believe. Is that right, Larry? 4 years into this?
We are in our 5th year now, Mark. We have completed 4 years.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, I have a hard time blowing out 5 candles, don't you?
That's right. Time flies when you're having fun and educating people about the fair tax. So, you know, I'll just share up front how I got involved here, and I think it's worth sharing because if you're, I know there's a lot of people on the line tonight who are new to the fair tax, and the way it happened for me was, well, I guess back in 2006 it was, just before I moved down here to Florida. I was in an airport, and I saw someone that I didn't know reading a book that had the IRS letters in it with a big, in circle with a big line through it. And many of you who are versed in the fair tax are probably well aware of that book written by John Linder and Neil Bortz, their first fair tax book, and I was absolutely floored. What a provocative cover. So I picked that book up, and I was on the way to fly to Mexico to meet my wife for a vacation, and long story short, she wasn't too happy with me because I could not put that book down. I read it cover to cover in a matter of just a couple days, and my life was forever changed because all of a sudden I saw something different than I had never seen before, and I started to think differently about my own responsibility as a citizen, about the path that our country was on, about our government and our country's leadership, and questioning that leadership. And so when I moved to Florida, I found a local fair tax group, and that's where I met my now colleague Larry Walters. Started to get involved, go to some local fair tax meetings, and found myself realizing that this was one of those things that I just couldn't say, sounds good, but I'll let somebody else do it. And boy, if the people that we educate would just take that position, we would be able to move this legislation along much, much more quickly. So more on that later in the presentation, but I honor all of you and acknowledge all of you for being on the call tonight because you're taking an hour out of your time to get educated, to get inspired, to learn how you can make a difference. And I'll tell you that there's a lot of causes in this country, but when we change our tax system in the way that the fair tax suggests, a lot of the causes and a lot of the challenges that we have in this country will all get solved simultaneously. And you'll see that as we go through the presentation tonight. So with that, let's rock and roll. So, you know, I always start out this presentation by saying that this country is great because we've evolved in so many wonderfully powerful ways. Unfortunately, economically, we have not evolved, and there's such an incredible opportunity to do that, to become a global leader. And we believe that if we become the first country that adopts legislation to this effect, that it might just inspire legislation like this throughout the democratic and capitalistic world. And so, as you can see here, we're now pushing 74,000 pages in our tax code. There's an interesting study done of a number of tax accountants, IRS workers, individuals responsible for looking after tax returns, and they're all given the exact same individual tax set of or tax scenario of an individual. And at the end of it, not one of those preparers got to the end and had the same result as their colleague. And the reason is because the tax system right now is extremely convoluted. And by the way, unfortunately, it's now been kept that way purposefully by your elected officials so they can keep how they spend American tax dollars in a shroud. And so more on that later in the presentation, but one of the great things about the fair tax, we say it's simple, it's fair, and it's transparent. And your elected officials do not want transparency in the tax code, because if there's transparency in the tax code, then they have to justify with maximum visibility how they spend their district dollars and all the American taxpayer dollars, right? So that's something to keep in mind as you think about how you elect your next officials. And we suggest that you make the creating an evolved tax system the #1 issue that you vote on. All right, so with that being said, we've got to evolve, and obviously we believe that that evolution for us is the Fair Tax Plan, known as HR 25 and S122 in the House. So it's legislation that exists right now, and I do this every single month, and sometimes Larry has to correct me, and sometimes he doesn't. But I believe if I get this number right, there are now 75 co-sponsors of the bill. When Larry has his chance to speak, he'll chime in and he can correct me if I'm wrong on that. I might be off by 1 or 2. But bottom line, what that means is there are exactly, or at least 75 members of Congress that have co-sponsored that bill and said, I support this fair tax legislation, and if it comes to the floor, it'll get my vote. Right? So we got to do better than that. We got to get well over 200 in order for this thing to really move forward and move into law. But we're moving in that direction. I believe this is the most co-sponsors we've had yet. So with that being said, what is it? Well, it's very simple. The fair tax will fund our federal government differently than how we fund it today. And how we fund it today is through a very complex and convoluted income tax system. And the fair tax eliminates income taxes, personal and corporate income taxes, as well as payroll taxes, and all the other taxes that you see on that screen, and it replaces that with a very simple point-of-sale consumption tax, or you might call it a national retail sales tax. And so how that works is that all businesses will simply levy a 23 cents out of every dollar spent at the cash register tax, or I should say the government will levy it, and the businesses will collect it. All right, so what that means is, for example, if you go to the store and buy a pair of designer jeans for $100, the fair tax is inclusive, by the way, in the price tag. So when you look at that price tag and it says $100, the fair tax of 23 cents on every dollar, or in this example, $23, is included in that price. And so what you're actually paying is $23 out of that $100 in federal tax. And the other 77, of course, is the amount of money charged by the retailer for those pair of jeans. So that's how it works, folks. And as you can see, the 2 check marks at the bottom there, there's no tax on business-to-business production costs, which means there's no fair tax levied on a business-to-business transaction. And then, of course, the last check mark, no tax on used goods, which is very interesting because, no tax on used goods allows us ultimately to make a choice on whether or not we want to pay taxes. And that's pretty interesting to think about. So we have the choice to purchase a used vehicle versus a brand new vehicle. We have the choice of purchasing a home that's already been lived in or a resale property versus a brand new construction or new build. We have the choices to purchase used goods. And that's very interesting. We don't have that choice right now. And so that is, to me, in ultra-capitalistic, to empower the consumer to make a choice to perhaps save a few dollars here and there on the purchases that they make. And that, to me, again, is such a pure representation of capitalism, really, of democracy. So really interesting to think about it that way. So that's it, folks. The fair tax legislation, that bill is 131 pages, double spaced. Compare that to the 73,000 plus pages of our current tax code. Simple, right? Transparent in that when you check out with those designer jeans and your receipt gets printed out, you'll see right on that receipt, $77 paid for jeans, $23 on national sales tax. Transparent, which means, guess what? If you walk out of that store 6 months down the road and you pay $101, and the tax rate went up to 24 or 25 cents on every dollar, you're going to see that. You're going to know when the tax system is changed. Whereas right now, what happens? A politician has some sort of initiative or project or legislation that they put forth that they've got to pay for, and they pull a lever, meaning they tweak some code to the tax system. We never know about it. And they like that, don't they? So transparency is key because it brings accountability to our politicians, in that they can't just change our tax code that affects the dollars that American taxpayers put forward to fund our government without us knowing about it and without talking to us about it, right? And so what we suggest is that when the fair tax gets passed, the greatest transfer of power will transpire in the history of this country, dating back to the Revolution. Pretty powerful, right? So think about that, and then again, think about the importance of that in holding our elected officials accountable, and think about perhaps making that the number one issue you vote on come election time. All right, so let's dig into this a little bit further. So one of the examples I like to use, I use the designer jeans example, but another way to suggest this, how this process works, and the impact on businesses and consumers, is a home builder. So a home builder is a business, and when that home builder goes out and purchases the hundreds or thousands of inputs they need to construct a new home, the fair tax is not levied on that. That's considered a business-to-business production cost. So they build that home, and for some simple number purposes, they sell that home at the retail level for the first time for $100,000 to the consumer. So when the consumer purchases that property for the very first time, $23,000 or 23% or 23 cents on every dollar of that home will be set aside by that home builder, and at the end of the month or the end of the quarter, depending on the size of that business, they will fill out a one-page tax form that simply lists their revenues, and they take 23% of those revenues and they hand that over with their tax form to their state sales tax bureau, who then hands it on over to the Department of the Treasury. That's how the process works. Now, when the consumer who's lived in that home, who paid the fair tax on that one time, goes to move out of that home and they sell it to another consumer, that new consumer who buys that resale property does not pay the fair tax. Considered a used good, and will always be a used good. Now, another thing to note here then is, if you think about services that are rendered at the retail level, for example, medical services, dental services, attorney services, accountant services, etc., every time that service is rendered, it's ultimately happening for the first time for that consumer, and the fair tax would be inclusive of all of those services, right? So you're getting an idea of how the fair tax works, how it gets collected, and we'll dig in a little bit more as we push on. So we've talked really about how simple and transparent it is, and now we want to talk about in just a minute here how fair it is. But before we do, it's really important, as we look at those examples of the designer jeans, of the home builder, to really understand our current pricing system. And so right now we believe that we're not only paying an income tax, but we're paying a sales tax. What do we mean by that? Well, businesses take their income taxes and they pass them off to the consumer, and they embed that in, of course, the price tag of everything that they sell. And we call that the embedded tax. or perhaps a hidden sales tax, where the business passes off their income taxes to the consumer. And if you think about it, what businesses do is they have all the expenses that go into the cost of their goods, and one of their line items is their income taxes, right? So they pass that off to the consumer. And across every industry, it's estimated that the average embedded tax hidden in every good that consumers pay is roughly 22%. And so when the fair tax gets passed, what happens, and it's not perfect this way, but what happens is that embedded amount, or 22%, comes out of the cost of goods, and the fair tax of 23% goes in, and it's not perfect. And so what we expect to happen is that prices will rise by somewhere around 6 to 10%. And then as businesses want to get ahead and try to capture more market share, then they will lower their prices to do that. And we expect within a year or 2 or 3 prices to fall to pre-fair tax levels, right? So it's really important to understand how our pricing system works right now. And we're really paying both right now, if you think about it. The fair tax would level that playing field and just ultimately implement a sales tax, and income taxes would go away. Okay, so again, let's iron this out. So hard cost savings for businesses, corporate income taxes go away, FICA withholdings and their share at 7.65%, that goes away. The cost to comply to the federal income tax code goes away. All their accountants and finance people and all the money they spend on making tax implicated decisions goes away. And at the end of the day, the impact is that for businesses, they get to save all this time in their tax. So they don't have, so every time they make an economic decision, they don't have to think about the tax implications, right? And then they actually save about 22% of those embedded costs, and you can see those costs right here: corporate income taxes, and FICA, and compliant cost goes away. That 22% goes away, and they replace that with the fair tax of 23%. Right? So getting an idea of what that looks like for an individual and for businesses. All right, so now let's talk fairness. So we've talked simple, we've talked transparent, let's talk fairness. So the prebate is part of the legislation written in that would ensure no one pays federal tax up to the poverty level. And this was done specifically to ensure that all Americans, but especially lower income class Americans, don't get overly taxed and are overly burdened by the taxation. And so what the prebate actually does is it rebates in advance of the month poverty level limit spending based on the size of your household. So if you look at this, the 2013 prebate schedule, on the right-hand side is a 2-adult household, on the left-hand side single. And this was created by the Department of Health and Human Services to suggest that based on the size of your household, here's how much you would spend at the poverty level limit over the course of a year. So let's say we're looking at 2-adult household on the right with 2 dependents, and there's 4 people in the family. So move your eyeballs to the right. And what the Department of Health and Human Services suggests is that over the course of a year, if you spend $30,260, you're spending at the poverty level, just covering your basic necessities. Typically, that is considered food, shelter, clothing, transportation, and medical supplies, right? Now, if you divide that $30,260 by 12, or excuse me, if you multiply that by 23%, the fair tax paid on that over the course of a year, a family of 4 would have paid $6,960, and you divide that by 12, and they will have paid $580 a month in fair tax. And so at the beginning of every month, the federal government is going to either send a check or perhaps direct deposit or perhaps send a check card that has $580 of spending on it. So that's a brand new revenue stream that will come into every qualifying American household, qualifying by having a valid Social Security number, right? So this is a really important part of the legislation. It creates fairness. It especially ensures that lower income class Americans are not overly burdened by taxes. And it does it for everyone. So everybody, regardless of income, income is not a factor here. Everybody gets the prebate as long as they qualify in their household with a valid Social Security number. All right, so prebate, really, really important part, very important to understand about the fair tax. Now, what are the benefits on our economy? Huge. First bullet point, $30 trillion in global personal and corporate assets parked offshore are attracted back in the United States. What does that mean? That means wealthy individuals and corporations shelter their wealth offshore so that Uncle Sam can't get its claws on it in the form of income taxes, personal or business income taxes, or capital gains taxes, what have you, right? So when those taxes get lifted and Americans and businesses are unburdened by those taxes, which, by the way, let's be honest, it inspires the wrong behavior. The more money people make and businesses make and the more growth they have, they're penalized for it. And we're inspiring the wrong behavior. And so the fair tax, by taxing spending, is lifting the burden off of Americans and businesses and inspiring growth, right? So think about that. So that money flows back into our economy because businesses are going to invest in what they know best, which is their business. So they invest more, they grow, they hire more staff, and as they hire more staff, people get more jobs, they have more disposable income, and they spend more as a result. And the economy dramatically grows. U.S. becomes a corporate headquarter haven, jobs, right? So businesses are going to flock to the United States because we have the lowest effective corporate income tax structure, effectively zero, right? And they're going to build buildings, they're going to hire staff as they relocate here, huge opportunity. And the underground economy, which is estimated $2 trillion, pays their fair share to the federal government, right? So, you know, every time somebody, an illegal immigrant or alien who is avoiding the tax system, they're paying their fair share every time they go and buy a pair of shoes or a new car or whatever it may be, right? So all these become new revenue streams either for our government, but most importantly, think about this for a second. Back in the foreclosure crisis, it was estimated that the average American, if they had an extra $500 to $700 come into their household every single month, they would have been able to keep their home. Imagine if we would have been able to avoid that housing crisis. And so if you think about the fair tax, no longer is there gross pay and net pay. You get 100% of your paycheck, right? Because there's no more income tax withholdings. There's no more payroll or FICA withholdings, right? So if right now, if you make $5,000 gross for a company and they withhold, you know, maybe $1,000 or $1,500 out of that, well, that goes away. You take home $5,000. Disposable income goes up on average by 29%. How about that? Plus the prebate comes into your household. So disposable income will be at an all-time high for Americans when the fair tax gets passed. And that is amazing. People are going to spend more, they're going to save more, they're going to invest more, and the markets and the economy will dramatically expand, which means more money will come into federal coffers, which means we will probably be able to save programs like Medicare and Social Security. Remember I said at the beginning, a lot of big-time challenges get solved when the fair tax gets implemented. Well, there's a big one, folks. Medicare and Social Security programs get saved because the federal government finally brings in enough money. Now, it doesn't curb their spending, but it brings in a lot more money as a result of economic growth. All right. So how does this whole thing work logistically? Well, right now, 45 states currently collect a sales tax, so the infrastructure is already in place there, and they will collect from businesses, which means we get, second bullet point, 80% more efficient. We collect from 18 to 20 million businesses, down from 120 million households. Very smart, right? Becoming a lot more efficient that way. By the way, the fair tax eliminates the IRS, which costs $10 billion to run every year. It will be defunded and eliminated after over a 3-year period. Only one state sales tax form to file, and the states are incentivized. State sales tax bureaus are incentivized 0.25% in all the revenue that they collect to fund their division to police and oversee the collection from the retailers. So, you know, such a simple system, very refreshing that way. So that's how it's collected. We've already got the infrastructure in place, and we will execute. So if you think about simple, fair, transparent, stimulates economic growth, who would be against it? Well, anybody whose current income is derived from our tax code. Lobbyists, politicians, IRS workers, some accountants who only work at tax returns. You know, the big two are on top there, lobbyists and politicians. So 50% of lobbyists are tax lobbyists. Well, if corporate income taxes go away, guess who loses the job? Tax lobbyists. So they say to politicians, you don't want to do that. And of course, they threaten them by saying, if you support the fair tax, guess what? You know, all that money that we dump into your re-election campaign, you can kiss that goodbye. And so, you know, they really hold a hammer over the politician's head. And of course, the politicians are in it for the wrong reason. They want to get reelected more than they want to represent. Right? And so they listen. And that's really how it works. You've got this elite minority that is making decisions and policy and influence into really important things that happen. And so the fair tax shifts that power away from these powerful special interest groups and lobbyists back to the people. Right? All right. So really important to remember when coming tax time, if somebody doesn't support the fair tax, the only reason is out of self-interest. It's the only reason. It's too intelligent of a legislation because it truly benefits everyone, all individuals, wealthy or of lower income, businesses, small or large corporations. It benefits everyone. So you got to believe if somebody isn't for it, then they're only not for it out of self-interest. So remember that come re-election time. So the best things you can do is get educated. This is the second book that Neil Bortz and John Linder wrote, The Fair Tax, The Truth Answers the Critics. It's a great book. They're both real great reads. I really recommend them. Send them to your elected officials. It's a great Christmas gift for your family. You can buy them on Amazon for probably under $10. Here's some great resources, some websites you can go on to get a lot of information about the fair tax. And what we're going to do right now, folks, is we're going to pause and we are going to stop and take some questions. So hopefully you've been taking some notes and writing down some questions. If you have, either put your hand up or go to your chat button and we will answer your questions right now. So I'll ask my colleague Larry to unmute himself. Larry, always being such a wealth of information.
I'm here.
And we will pass along those questions to Larry. Thank you, Larry. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you again.
It sure is after 2 months being off.
Hey, for those, just a comment here, for those folks who, like myself, are afflicted with something that I call detailitis, when Mark talks about the 23%, and that it, I forgot the point I was going to make. Well, so let me shut up and we'll go on with the questions.
All right, I'm sure it'll come around, Larry. You always make good points, so marinate on it. Okay, so the first question is from Ben. Did Herman Cain support the FairTax? Oh, by the way, I do see some folks with their hands up. We'll go ahead and get you in just a minute, so sit tight. Did Herman Cain support the FairTax plan in his primary campaign? I believe he did. Staunchly supported, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, Larry?
Well, he started to until he decided to have some financial services people create a new tax plan for him, and he came up with 999. So the answer is yes, but no. He changed his mind midstream.
Okay, so Rosemary asked the question, will renting an apartment be taxed or leasing cars? Yes and yes. And so every time you pay your housing payment, considered a service, so that will fall under the fair tax. And the same thing as your transportation, right? So purchasing a vehicle, a brand new vehicle, you'll pay the fair tax. And then when you lease a vehicle, you lease a new vehicle, and every month you pay is basically the new, you're exchanging dollars for the new right to drive that automobile for a month, that new automobile for a month. So yes, in that sense, renting and leasing will be taxed. All right, next question is from Robert. Robert says, note, $100 retail purchase actually only contains $18.70 in fair tax. 23% of $81.70 plus $81.70 equals $100. So that might be tricky for us to explain without showing it up on a screen. So, Robert, that is noted, and without doing it in my head, I'm actually not sure that that's correct. You might debate me on that, but I need to take a minute and actually go through it in my head. I'm just going to shelf it for a minute, and then we'll come back to it because I don't want to confuse people without them being able to see the math on the screen. Mark? We'll go to the next question. Go ahead, Larry.
Mark, I see on your screen where you're getting a low battery warning.
Oh, I am. Thank you, Larry. Gotcha. Great. I'm going to plug that back in. Thank you. Okay. Let's go back to our questions here. This question comes from Rick. It says, I understand that we eliminate income and payroll tax, but what about all the other taxes like on car tags on our vehicles, dock stamps on our houses? Will they be eliminated as well? Larry, do you want to handle that?
Sure enough. Those taxes you're referring to are not federal income tax related, Rick. They are state imposed, and the fair tax is only directed towards replacing the current revenue stream that the income tax system provides.
Perfect. Simple and straightforward. Again, one of the things that we love about our fair tax is how simple it is, right? Okay, I'm just going to pause my screen. I don't know if you're seeing me go back and forth, but I apologize if you were. So we'll get you on that, those resources. And question from Ben, he says, or asked, does Steve Forbes support the fair tax? I think he's a flat tax guy. Is that right, Larry?
Yeah, he designed what we consider now the original flat tax, and it is the one that is embedded in the HR 1040 legislation. That's the flat tax that goes in as an amendment or an addendum to the income tax system we are suffering from today. So no, he doesn't support the fair tax. Mark?
Yeah. All right, thank you, Larry. A question from Alice says, there are a few arguments against the fair tax. Will rebuttals be brought out and discussed on the webinar. You know, from my standpoint, I don't really see any argument against it. You know, certainly I've read the FairTax book cover to cover, both of them. If you want to write in, Alice, of anything specific that you're referring to, we will go ahead and rebut it right here. And Larry, if you have anything that you believe is really common, we can bring it to light here, but anything specific would be helpful in that regard, Alice.
Sure. One of the things you might want to do, Alice, is go on the FairTax website and get the Q&A document. It lists a whole bunch of questions, some of which are, of course, are in the way of objections or opposition, and that may help you. Also, if you haven't done so, in whatever state you're in, join the Florida Yahoo group for your state. And there you have a lot of dialogue, and there's a lot of good information that gets passed along that would give you not only the answer to this question, or the one you might have in mind, but many others along the way. And you can ask questions there too. The webinar is not designed to specifically rebut opposition to the fair tax. There are rebuttal papers, once again, on FairTax.org, though, which you can find. So the first we have to know what it is you're thinking about as far as an opposition. Mark?
Yeah, thank you, Larry. All right, we'll take a few more, go to a couple hands, we'll get to our special topic, and then we'll circle back for any other questions. Okay, so Joe writes in, it would be good to have a slide showing example tax payments for low, middle, high, super high income people before fair tax and after fair tax. That would be real good, Joe. I'll give it to you real on the after fair tax side right now, math that people can do in their head, and we'll use simple round numbers. Somebody spends $10,000 in a year, they're going to pay $2,300 in taxes. They spend $100 grand, they're going to pay $23,000 in taxes. If they spend $1 million, they're going to pay $230,000 in taxes. So that's on post-fair tax. But I really do like that example of the before and the after, and how you can compare that to how much taxes you actually pay before and after. So duly noted, and we'll put that into a slide going forward. I like that idea. Thank you, Joe. All right. Let's see. This is from David. David says, as I read the bill, I understand the fair tax rate to be 23%, which is paid on top of the cost of goods. So a $100 item would cost $123. Otherwise, the tax rate, as Mark explained it, is 30%. Yeah. So this is always a tricky, somewhat semantic issue when it comes to the fair tax. Is it actually 23% or is it actually 30%? So the answer is that it really is semantics. It's 6 one way and half a dozen the other, and it works out to the same amount. So when the fair tax is inclusive, it's 23%. When the fair tax is exclusive, it becomes 30%. And Larry, I'm trying to think of a simple mathematical explanation there to make that really transparent, but I'm not sure I can do it in a way without confusing people, without typing it on the slide. What do you think?
Well, I think we might be able to do it. It will address a little bit of Ben's question earlier with his $81.70 example.
Okay.
The fair tax is 23 cents out of the dollar, period. So if you have a $100 expenditure, $23 of that $100 is the fair tax. If you take 100 and you multiply it by 23%, you come up with $23. So you subtract 23 from the 100, that leaves you with 77. If you add, and it's really a fractional number slightly under 30%, to the 77, you're back to 100. So no matter how you calculate it, internally or externally, inclusive or exclusive taxing, it's still 23 cents out of the dollar. And I hope I didn't confuse anybody. Mark?
Yeah, Thanks, Larry. We've done this. We've done a webinar on that before, really illustrating those numbers very transparently. And again, at the end of the day, the best way to understand it is that 23 cents of every dollar spent at the retail level is taxed, and that's what matters most.
Yeah, the more important point, Mark, is that regardless of whether it's 23% or 30%, we still have more disposable income because we take home our complete paychecks without any federal tax deductions.
Yeah, fair. Good point. All right, I'm gonna see who's got their hand up here. So I gotta click on a couple buttons here. So everybody stay with me. Let's see who has their hand up. Patricia. So Patricia, and it looks like you're still with us. I have just unmuted you. So if you would like, we will give you the floor right now. You are live on the National FairTax webinar, and feel free to share your question or comment.
I'm still not real clear on the prebate.
Still not clear on the prebate.
Yes.
Anything specific about it that's troubling you, or you want just another general overview?
Just another general overview.
Okay, great. We'll go ahead. I'm going to mute you again, Patricia,
Okay.
just so we don't get any background noise, but we'll go ahead and explain that again briefly. So the prebate reimburses all American households for the fair tax that was levied on their spending up to the poverty level limit of spending. In fact, there's a question here, I think it's from Alice, who asked, why is it 23%? And actually, that's something different. I got mixed up, so strike that. So back to Patricia and the prebate. Department of Health and Human Services has, through a formula, determined that based on the size of your household, there's a certain amount of spending that is considered spending at the poverty level. And when you spend that amount and you multiply it by 23%, the government is going to reimburse all qualifying households for the fair tax they pay up to the poverty level. And that's why they get the prebate every month. On the spending that they do above and beyond that, there's no reimbursement. Right? So the purpose for that was to ultimately, quote unquote, untax the basic necessities of life up to the poverty level limit for everyone, so that, again, lower income class Americans are not overly burdened by taxes by just trying to survive and get by. So hopefully I didn't over-explain that, Patricia, but I'll unmute you and ask you if that is helpful.
What is the poverty level?
Well, that goes back to the prebate schedule that you saw on a previous slide. And if you'd like, you can go to fairtax.org and download that information. But it's right there for you, and I suggest going to that resource to download it.
Okay, I've already written that down.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, so really great questions. There's a bunch more. So we're going to get to those. Let's do this. Let's move to our special topic. It's super quick, as it usually is. We will go through that, and then we'll circle back to any questions that are left. And so the special topic is what we're calling the fair tax elevator speech or pitch. So in a matter of just literally a few words, how can you very simply explain the fair tax? And what we did is we actually solicited feedback from a lot of our fair tax peers that are extremely knowledgeable, and we mixed and matched, and what we came up with was a sentence and then an acronym taking into account the tenets of the fair tax. So the first one, and quite honestly, we can't take too much credit for this. It just made too much darn sense when we put this together. The first elevator pitch comes from the fair tax pocket card, which is actually a little 3x5 card that you can literally stick in your pocket and keep on you. And it says very succinctly, the fair tax is nonpartisan legislation to replace federal income and payroll taxes with a progressive national retail sales tax. Pretty straightforward, right? So basically what it says is we're eliminating income taxes, we're replacing it with a national retail sales tax. Now, it obviously leaves a lot out, but at its core, that is what it does, what the fair tax does. So we like that because it's very broad and all-encompassing, so to speak. And it basically tells, in a nutshell, here's what the fair tax is. Now, the next one we put together was an acronym that perhaps gets a little bit more detailed. So here's what this looks like. And the acronym is FREEDOM. So F is for fair. Everyone pays the same tax rate and receives a rebate on poverty level spending. Fair. It's reliable. Income taxes are eliminated and taxes are only leveled on retail spending. And we've actually done a special topic on this. Historically, consumption is much more reliable than income. So fair and reliable, which means it's more stable source of income for the government. So it makes sense logically for them to implement it. It's efficient. Businesses collect taxes at the point of sale, and they only fill out a one-page tax form each month to submit taxes. And April 15th comes just another spring day, right? So very, very efficient. It's effective. It inspires growth and stimulates spending. So remember what I said before about our current tax code, is it inspires the wrong behavior. It penalizes growth. And that's not what we want. We want a tax system that collects the same amount of revenue or more than our current tax system, but we want it to inspire growth. And obviously the fair tax does that. It's detached, meaning it's impartial to individual or business investment decisions, right? So what a business decides to do about growing and expanding has nothing to do with our tax structure. But that's not true right now. A business and a business owner has to spend an enormous amount of energy and thinking and sometimes money around tax implications in business decisions. So it's detached or impartial to investment decisions. Observable or transparent. You transparently see your tax rate printed on all retail receipts, and it's modest, meaning it's very simple. Legislation is 131 pages double-spaced, and like the Fair Tax Pocket Card tells you very simply, it simply eliminates income taxes and replaces that with a progressive national retail sales tax. Modest or simple, right? So freedom. So if you like acronyms, and I do, it's a great way to share what the fair tax is while also being able to perhaps dig into some of its nuances. So hopefully you like that one. Larry, do you like that one?
Well, it tells the story, Mark, but you know I'm not a fan of acronyms, so I can't honestly say I like it, but I don't dislike it.
Always honest. I love it. Thank you, Larry.
You got it. You asked the question.
All right.
You should be ready to catch the ball.
That's very true. Always keeping me honest. All right. Let's go back to our questions. Let's do a roundup of these. A couple more hands up, and then we will wind down for the evening. So we've got about 10 more minutes before. We'll stay on for as long as it takes to answer your question. So here we go. Let's see here. I'm just going through these, eliminating some duplicates. Okay, so Dale asked the question, what about a state tax for the individual? Right, so Dale, again, I think Larry kind of addressed this with another question, but what the states do in terms of income taxes or sales taxes is independent of the fair tax. The fair tax is legislation at the national level. However, it is highly believed that if nationally we move to a consumption tax or sales tax, that the states will do that. In fact, there's a couple of states right now that are strongly considering eliminating their income tax and moving to a sales tax platform. But again, the two are independent of each other. All right. David makes a comment that says, might be a good idea to mention Herman Cain's website poll for voting on a new tax system. The FairTax is one of the three choices, and he'll take the results national. Good point. Thank you, David. Although I wonder if he has the 999 on that, if that's one of the three choices.
That is one of the three choices.
Okay, so now his 99 is now in competition with the FairTax. Is that accurate?
That's correct. I think he really I think he really knows that the FairTax is going to come out on top of that little survey, and his idea is to get behind, for everybody, to get behind one tax plan, and the choices are the flat tax, the FairTax, or 999.
Got it. Got it. Alice asked the question, how is the 23% determined? Why not 20% or 25, etc.? Great question, Alice, because there was a brain trust of some of the brightest PhD minds in the country, I think in the world, one of which was a Nobel laureate, that went into designing the financials around the FairTax number, and at the end of the day, 23% was determined because that was the number that would be revenue neutral for the federal government to collect. In other words, at the 23% level, they will collect in the first year at least the same amount of money that they're collecting now, and perhaps greater as the economy expands. So that is the reason why 23% ended up being the number, to keep the revenue collection for the government neutral and collect at least the same amount as much as they're collecting now. Great question. Question from Ben. If each household set up a corporation, would all transactions then be business to business and thus avoid federal taxation? I don't know, Ben. You know, I think that if you have a tax ID number and you have you know, the purchases for tax, the purchases for your business must be in line with the type of business that you're in. So if your corporation is a consultant of some sort, and you're suggesting that your grocery store purchases are business transactions, you know, I'm pretty sure the State Sales Tax Bureau is going to see through that. Any thoughts on that, Larry?
No, you hit it pretty much on the head. If you're going to have a business, especially if you're going to set up a corporation, you have to identify pretty specifically what you're going to be doing. And if you're not showing the revenue that that particular business would normally bring in, the state will catch that, as you have mentioned, and you'll be looked at very closely and probably visited.
Thank you, Larry. Okay, question from Joe. Has there been research studies on how people absorb and understand the FairTax, and what's the best way to market it? Almost like companies selling a product. That's a great question, Joe. You know, I think, to my knowledge, I am unaware of a specific study around how people understand the FairTax, or for that matter, any change in tax legislation. You know, and I think what you're saying and what you're asking gets at the heart of how to move this legislation forward. You know, we've always said that this is a grassroots effort. The best way to share it and market it is for one person to tell their peers, and thus that there's trust there about it. And so I have credibility with my friends and family and constituents, and when I tell them that I believe in this and I've looked at it, and to get them onto a webinar like this, or get them educated in some way, then typically they're going to trust my judgment for it to be worth their time to explore it. So the answer to that question is crucial. There's no doubt about it. And I think if we had the answer, then certainly we'd be further along in this crusade. Any other feedback for Joe, Larry?
No, Mark, you did fine.
All right.
The best way to market it, we don't have the funds to do, and that would be to put on television ads. So if anybody has a couple of $1 million hanging around they would like to contribute, I'm sure we'll make good use of it.
Yeah, and to that point, and really going right back to your point, Joe, it's so easy. It's very easy for the opposite, in a political campaign, for the opponent of going up against the candidate who supports the fair tax to slam their opponent by saying this person wants to raise taxes by 23%. And they conveniently leave out that by supporting the fair tax, that candidate also proposes to completely eliminate personal and corporate income taxes, payroll taxes, and all withholdings, and as a result increase on average every American's disposable income or income by 29%. Right? So education is absolutely the key to this. And as Larry just pointed out, we don't have the funds to go mainstream media. And if we did, that would be huge. So corporate sponsorship of that type of campaign would be vital and extremely valuable. And if there's any great ideas out there around it, then send them our way.
Yeah, now's a good time to insert what we are doing as we talk about the fair tax, and that is mention the fact that the fair tax literally abolishes the IRS. And everybody is understanding now what the IRS has been doing and how they have pulled certain businesses or nonprofits for scrutiny on both sides of the aisle. It just depends on who's in power at the time. And they're just not very, very clean as far as we are concerned. So since there's so much ruckus about the IRS, now's a good time to promote that. How would you like to get rid of the IRS? Well, H.R. 25 does that. What's H.R. 25? It's legislation. It's literally off the card. It's legislation. It's nonpartisan legislation to replace federal income and payroll taxes with a progressive national retail sales tax. And along those lines, it also eliminates the IRS. Mark?
Yeah, thank you. Going back, John, one of our great supporters, longtime supporter, John Bettel, wrote a great comment back in about the corporation. I forgot whose that was. And he reminded me, it's so simple that I even forgot. If you had a corporation, you'd be expected to pay the fair tax you were collecting on sales, right? So no, you won't be able to cheat out of the fair tax. Good point, John. Thank you. All right, so yeah, and Rick says the stark contrast with the oppressive and punitive tax code currently needs to be pointed out to everyone, anywhere and everywhere that it possibly can, no question. And one of the things is that what we say to everyone on this line is a call to action. Come back next month and bring just one more person to the webinar, or go to fairtax.org and find a local group and get involved. Donate your money. What I do is just a number that's comfortable for me. I just put it on automatic pilot. Every month it debits my account. Can you imagine if the hundreds of thousands of fair tax supporters nationwide did that at just 10 or 20 bucks every single month, or $100 for that matter? then we're talking tens of millions of dollars to have, right? So, these are all things that you can do, but the best thing that you can do is to get involved, and don't let your first or second exposure to the fair tax be your last, and spread the word. Be a crusader. Spread the message. Bring people to the webinar. Get involved. Mail them the book, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's see. Just looking, there's a couple of duplicates here. Question from Ben, if passed, would the fair tax plan be phased in or implemented overnight? Well, effectively it would happen overnight, and yet it would be phased in for businesses. And so what that would look like, Ben, so let's say the fair tax passed this year, then what would happen is, as of December 31st, 2013, all income taxes, capital gains taxes, payroll taxes, all of those taxes would go away. They would cease. And as of January 1st, the fair tax would go into effect. Now, there would need to be a year's worth of time to make sure all the systems are set up for all the businesses to collect the fair tax at every point of sale, for the state sales tax bureaus to be set up, and that would be over the course of a year. And then, of course, for businesses, I believe the number is they have an additional year where any existing inventory, past inventory up to $1 million worth, they do not have to, any sales on existing inventory, they don't have to declare over the course of the first year. So it would be phased in when it's passed the first year, the infrastructure set up, and then the following January 1st, income tax would go away and the fair tax would be implemented. All right, let's see. Ron wrote that he loved the Freedom acronym, Larry. So there you go. I've got some fans out there. Thank you, Ron. Rick says, I love not having to consider how money made will be treated in terms of tax consequences. That is huge. That is freedom. And Rick, I could not agree with you more. In fact, when I read the Fair Tax book back in 2006, my mind was so blown about this concept that I thought to myself, wow, I don't care if it's neutral for me. In other words, if the tax consequences for me financially are the same or even worse, the fact that I don't have to think about it and go through tax season every year is absolutely beautiful. Couldn't agree with you more. So thank you for that. And then finally, how is this different from Europe's value-added tax? From Rosemary. Larry, do you have anything on that? Larry, you are on mute.
Sorry, gang.
Or we lost you.
Yeah. A VAT, a value-added tax, is a tax that is collected at each step of the process of bringing a product to the retail sale. So if there's 3 steps or whether there's 30 steps, in other words, 30 different companies that get involved in taking the product from the ore in the earth, for example, to the semiconductor that gets manufactured, to the company that builds a circuit board that uses the semiconductor, and so on and so forth, and all of the transportation in between. Each step has a tax added to it. The VAT is a fairly complex tax system, and the VAT can be manipulated by charging higher taxes at one step than at another step, and it can be manipulated by giving favors of lower taxes to certain industries as opposed to others. How it compares to the fair tax? Because the fair tax is only taxed one time at the retail sale to the end user, There is no room for manipulation. It makes it very clean and, as Mark had mentioned earlier, transparent, right off of the acronym. Mark?
All right, folks. Well, that's all the questions that we have. Well, wait a minute. There's actually a couple of hands still. Let me see if we have any hands.
That's Stephen Eldridge has a hand up.
Yep, there's a hand from Stephen. Stephen, we're going to go ahead and unmute you. Wow, thank you for being patient. Stephen, if you can hear us, you have the floor.
Okay, I have two quick questions and a couple of comments. First of all, are these slides, the charts available someplace? Can you tell us where to find those?
Yeah, absolutely. You're going to get a follow-up email, and you can reply to that email, and that email will come to Larry and I, and we can go ahead and send you a copy of the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay. Secondly, did you say that the 29% increase in take-home pay includes is your take-home your taxes and rebate, or just your taxes?
That's just the taxes. Just think about it this way. Right now, you're having deducted from your $100 pay.
I understand that. I understand it, Larry. I just want to know whether he meant whether it was 29% or just the taxes. That's okay. So it's just the taxes.
That's correct.
Okay.
And look at it another way. The prebate is not part of your income.
Yeah.
That's not part
I
of what you
understand.
take
Okay.
home.
I just want to make two comments. First of all, you talked about the decline in prices of 22% to be replaced by the fair tax, so retail prices stay the same. Correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we suggest that sorry, Larry, we suggest that prices will go up 6 to 10%. It's not super clean as taking 22% out and 23% in. There will be some increase in prices, but we do expect them to come back down.
Well, okay. My point was that the economist that was paid by the fair tax, Professor Dale Jorgensen, when he first said that prices would come down 22%, he later explained that 22%, 2/3 of that's going to be your raise, which is so only the maximum decline will be about 7% maximum. And I think that'll be even less than that. So at 93% plus 30%, you're back up to about 120%. And the fair tax people admit to some of that. But that's what Dale Jorgensen said. And secondly, I've done a little work, and when it says the prebate will pay back poor people for their poverty level purchases. I submit to you that it will overpay them for their poverty level purchases. It gives them free Social Security if they're working, and it makes sure in several ways to give them more than they'll pay in fair tax on their poverty level purchases. So it goes a lot further than what you're really saying.
Okay, Steve, it does not give them free Social Security, because under the fair tax, it is the tax that's collected also funds Social Security and Medicare. So when they purchase stuff,
Larry, what I meant was if a person is working, he no longer pays Social Security tax.
But under the fair tax, he pays Social Security taxes when he buys something.
Yes, but the prebate at a poverty level person pays him back every dime of fair tax he will pay, plus some more on top of that.
Up to the poverty level only.
I don't see what you're trying to explain there, Steve. So I can't agree with what you said.
Let me try to say it this way: a poor person, okay, a person who's earning at the poverty level, now gets a break. A, he doesn't pay Social Security tax anymore, and secondly, the prebate check that he gets will be greater in dollars than any fair tax he's going to pay on poverty level prebate.
It'll be equal.
Gives him a double benefit.
It will be equal to what he pays.
What's that?
The prebate that he gets.
Yes.
Okay, let's establish our presumptions here.
Yes.
We're saying a person who is literally living at the poverty level. In other words, he is spending whatever the poverty dollars are that's assigned for that year. 23% of that is what he gets back. So his net tax liability is zero.
Right.
Can we agree on that?
We agree. And if he had that money that he got from working, he's got more than that because he used to pay Social Security taxes.
Well, sure.
Now he doesn't.
Yeah, he gets to take home a full paycheck also.
Yes, but even if he paid the full amount of fair tax, okay, he's getting back that full amount of fair tax, and so he's now ahead of the game because he doesn't pay Social Security taxes.
Okay, I see what you're saying, and yes, you can argue that, and it's justifiable. But here's one thing that I think you might be overlooking.
Yeah?
What do you think he will do with the prebate money he receives?
He'll spend it, but what I'm saying to you,
Okay.
There are several ways, Larry. Listen to what I'm saying. There are several ways in which that prebate calculation makes sure that he's going to get more money from the prebate than he's going to spend in fair tax. Just take, for example, suppose whatever he buys on the black market, he's not going to pay fair tax, but the prebate gives him that money, assuming he spent it all at Walmart.
That's
and paid the full fair.
That's true, and if he buys something that's used, he won't be paying the fair tax on it for the most part. So there are ways there in which he will be having more money than he is earning. Absolutely, I agree with that.
And let me make another comment. This is a good comment from John Vettel, who says he's probably right that the poor will get more back, but you may be discounting the money they now get back from the earned income, etc., of the current income that will go away. The poor
Mike,
will not get better.
I'm not discounting that, Mike. The problem is that, yes, there's refundable tax credits today, which are terrible, but the fair tax, in effect, expands refundable tax credits because the prebate is given to everybody, whether they work or not. Refundable tax credits are given only to people who work. So the fair tax doubles down on the prebate, on the refundable tax credits.
So let me ask you a question. Do you,
Sure.
in the event that perhaps under what I think is an isolated scenario that you're suggesting,
Yeah.
that they do get tangibly more dollars back in prebate money than what they've spent in fair tax, do you have a problem with that?
I certainly do. I'm not in favor of increasing welfare, which is what the fair tax does.
The intention of the prebate is certainly not. That is not the intention of the prebate. You understand?
That's what it does, Mike.
Okay, let me offer this as a larger picture. Even though we'll agree, yes, they're getting back more, and it's increasing the welfare for those people who are at that particular lifestyle. Even though that might be a negative for the fair tax proposal, compared to the current income tax system, which would you rather have, the fair tax or the income tax?
Larry, I think the answer to that, you and I, and as Alice asked you the question, I think that I'd like to do that with you in a full and open debate. Okay?
I just asked you a simple question. Don't evade the question.
It's like I want neither of those. I want a very, very, very flat income tax. I don't want the current system, and I don't want the fair tax.
Okay, but do you understand that a flat income tax system will never stay flat? As long as the 16th Amendment is...
Do you understand that Congress can make the fair tax worse next year? Both of those systems are equally exposed. Neither one of the two systems, a flat tax or the fair tax, neither one can tie the hands of a future Congress. So they're both exposed equally.
They're both exposed. I do not believe it's equally. Under an income tax system, because the 16th Amendment is still in play,
right,
Congress can easily reinstitute a tax. Mark, what's the tax? Capital gains tax.
No,
okay,
Larry,
under the fair tax system, they cannot do that because the fair tax eliminates the income tax.
Incorrect, Larry. I agree with you in part. Under a simple flat 10% tax, Congress can find ways to make it worse. I agree. That's an exposure. I agree with you.
Okay.
But what you're saying, the other part I don't. When you have the fair tax, so long as the 16th Amendment stays in existence, and Congress next year or in 7 years can repeal the sunset clause, it is going to be very easy for Congress to say, guess what? The revenues aren't coming in. We need what do we need? A new income tax. Your exposure to winding up with a fair tax and an income tax is worse. Under
Okay.
that tax, if you've never adopted a consumption tax, your exposure is a whole lot less. Larry, I really think, I know what you said before, Mark, but I think there are many valid criticisms. I know you don't think there are any, but let's do this in a full-blown debate. Let's have it all out in public. If you're right, you'll win the argument. I mean, I think that there are some flaws, and I think a flat income tax is a whole lot better. You think the fair tax is better? Let's have it out. Let people decide. And if you're right, you'll win the argument.
Sounds good to us.
Great. And I really commend you for doing that. And I think that's wonderful. And I think it doesn't matter whether I'm right or you're right. It matters what the people think. So let's do this in front of them.
Well, there have been in the past several debates of professional economists and economics professors on
Larry?
teams who have negotiated this, debated this.
Hey, Larry?
Yes, sir.
Larry, in all due respect, I'm thrilled you said that, Larry. Economists can predict nothing, zero.
Wow.
They have a lot of papers and they have a lot of mathematics, and you know something? It's all a theory. They can prove nothing.
Well, you're right. It is theory, and it reminds me of what President Eisenhower said at one point.
Yeah.
He'd like to find a one-handed economist because they always tell you this will happen, but on the other hand, this will happen.
They tell that about lawyers too, Larry.
Well, I'm going to stop. I'm going to actually step in here, guys, and I appreciated this debate. So thank you, Stephen. I really do appreciate it. And what I'm going to say in closing to that is, I like the point about a debate, and you're right. What makes that valuable is it brings at least education and information, hopefully in what I would call in an integrist way, to the people who can make up their own mind as to which system they support and feel is best for them and best for the country, and then they decide. So that is a good idea, and I hope we get the opportunity to do more of that. So Stephen, if you're listening, I'm sure you are, thank you for participating. I really do appreciate your input. And if you have ideas or suggestions about a debate, please go ahead and email Larry or I, or email back the thank you email you'll get after this webinar, and we'll be happy to talk to you about that offline. And so
Absolutely.
With that, I want to thank my colleague Larry for his dedication and for his wealth of information. And I want to thank most of all everyone on the line who took an hour and 15 minutes out of their night to get educated, to be in the debate, to do their civic duty, because you obviously care about the direction of this country. And altering our tax code is a huge, huge factor in the direction of where this country goes. So with that, I want to challenge you to spread this message, challenge you to get people educated, and not necessarily to sell them or manipulate them in the spirit of Stephen's debate on this line, but to simply give them the information, share your opinion, but then let them come to their own conclusion. And I, for one, who can say, having educated thousands on the fair tax, I would suggest less than 1% don't like the idea. So the more we get it out there, the greater opportunity I believe we have to move this movement forward and to get it at least into the forefront of mainstream America where they can get educated and as a result make up their own minds. So with that, I want to, again, challenge you to come back next month to the National FairTax webinar, fourth Thursday of every month. Check the website, fftea.webinars.com, in order to register for the event. Bring back a friend or two, and we hope to see you back here, and have a great rest of your summer, everybody. Thanks, and have a great night.